Okay, before we turn into the panel debate, and I do invite all speakers here in front, we have one more program left, which is the spoken column by Dr. Elisabeth Brüggen, Associate Professor of Marketing and Netspar Fellow at the University of Maastricht. And it's so nice because you did prepare, as I said, a spoken column because you will give us an insight in the challenges you faced to become associate professor, and I think people will recognize quite a bit. And compared your column to all the content we got this morning, I think that gives a wonderful introduction to the panel debate as well. So the floor is yours, Elisabeth Brüggen.
Okay, dear guests, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me being here today and giving some personal insights into some of the challenges that I've experienced. I don't think it's generalizable, but I think you'll get a more personal idea, and you'll also see actually a fit with a couple of the presentations that we've already seen. But interestingly, if you would have asked me at the beginning of my PhD period if I would think that an academic career is more challenging for women than for men, I would have probably said no. Back then, we're actually only female PhD students in our department, so there couldn't be a disadvantage for women, could it? Well, in the meantime, I experienced a few, and I'll take a few minutes to highlight the most important structural challenges, personal challenges, but also the support factors. So let's start with the structural challenges. And this is actually something that concerns women with children, because for me, the biggest issue really was research time. In the years that my children were born, I didn't get a reduction of my teaching load, which was common practice in our department. But it basically means that I had 2 years with hardly any research time. So what does this imply? This is a stylized representation of a full-time job with roughly 50% teaching, 50% research. And this is actually my trajectory with roughly 26% research time. So you see two very different trajectories, but the requirements, for example, to become research fellow are exactly the same. However, I should also mention that I experienced that it's not necessarily bad intention, but people, actually including myself before I experienced it, simply do not think about those issues. And when I realized this, I wrote a letter to the head of our research school pointing out the issue and a possible solution. And I was very glad to see that our research school indeed adapted this practice and granted permission for long-term illnesses and maternity leave. Although I think it's a step in the right direction, I also realized recently there's still more room for improvement since it doesn't really cover the time before becoming a fellow. And one thing that has also already been mentioned this morning is actually tenure. I should say that I did get an extension for my tenure track time, so I did get an additional 8 months for both of my children. However, 6 out of the 8 months were again teaching, so it didn't necessarily help a lot. And I agree, we copy the American system, but our labor laws are more restricted, so it's very difficult to give more extensions, so I think this remains a challenge for women. Now, when preparing this talk, it was rather easy to come up with actually a couple of structural challenges that I faced. But if I'm quite honest, I think there were also a couple of personal challenges or things maybe that I didn't do in the most optimal way to foster my career. And I call them personal challenges, and since, again, I don't want to claim generalizability, even though I think, and also from the presentations that we've already seen, that maybe more women face those challenges since we sometimes do things differently than men. And this is something you'll recognize already from the presentations earlier this morning. It was really an eye-opener for me when I attended a women luncheon at a major conference a couple of years ago, and someone recommended this book, Women Don't Ask. It was then that I realized, I'm maybe not the only person who's not very good in negotiations. I should actually say, though, I think I can negotiate, but apparently, like many women, I often do not recognize a situation as a negotiation situation. To give you an example, someone would approach me with an exciting task. I would typically jump at the opportunity and throw myself into it and get all excited about it instead of first asking, hey, what's actually in it for me? Once I realized this, I also attended a training program offered by the university, and that was also very helpful for me to actually get some help, learn some tricks, and learning to ask. Now, what helped me to actually get where I am right now? First of all, role models, and this has also already been mentioned, and I'm very glad that one of my closest role models is actually also sitting here in the audience, my colleague Gabi Odekerken-Schröder. And for me, it was always really helpful to see, to have someone in front of me who's a great colleague and a great mother. Especially in the beginning periods when my kids were young, I was struggling with the question, can I be a good mother and work quite a lot? So that was really helpful, but also seeing practical tips on how to arrange daycare, how to arrange vacation time, and so on. And the other support factor is actually my husband, Alexander. I should mention that we got to know each other at the beginning of our PhD period, and for him it was always obvious that we'd both pursue our academic career, also with children. And that means sharing housework and parental duties. But maybe more importantly, when I was hesitant to travel, because that implied not seeing the kids for a couple of days, he would actually push me and remind me that it's part of my job, when it would have been easier and more comfortable for him if I would have stayed at home. Or if we have a conflict in our agenda, I'm typically inclined to actually step back, but he himself actually cuts back on many occasions and doesn't go to seminars or conferences if my appointments are more important. And I realize that that's still not self-evident today, and I'm very grateful that he pushes me to pursue my career and counters my female instincts at times. Now, having said all of this, what do I think should happen? First of all, I think we should critically examine and address the structural challenges that are in the system. I highlighted one that was most important for me, but of course there are more such examples. And quite frankly, I think that we can and should address those issues as soon as possible. What will be more challenging to address, and that was also mentioned quite nicely, are more implicit challenges, biases towards women. As one professor told me, quite frankly, you have to decide what you want, children or publications. I think that's a nice quote which maybe also highlights the biases towards women. However, I also think that we women ourselves have to step up and do something, whether it's requesting structural challenges or whether it's working on our own behaviors. And I recently got the nice opportunity to maybe start giving back to the community. I received an NWO grant over 200,000 euros. And what's quite interesting about this grant is that NWO specifies that 50,000 euros have to be spent on diversity. So I decided to use the money to set up the Elinor Ostrom Fund for Female Scientists. For your information, Elinor Ostrom is the first and only female Nobel laureate in economic sciences, and will use the money and try to actually support women in their academic career. And I was really glad to hear from my dean, Philippe Vergouwen, that he's very supportive of the initiative, and I assume that SBE will also provide funding. And since I'm learning to ask, I hope that the university overall will also be supportive of this initiative. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, very much, Elisabeth Brüggen.